Sanbonani Dumilang, good evening and welcome to episode 373 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zamantungwa Kumalo. It's a Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to it. You're tuned into the only daily property talk show in South Africa that helps you on your property needs. And to all our regular viewers on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as on YouTube, welcome to it. You know how we do. Every single weekday, you and I have an appointment at 7 p.m. where I'm always in conversation with a property expert who helps us navigate our property decision. And it doesn't matter where you are in your property journey, this is the show that helps you along the way. And talking about shows that help you along the way, you know that you can also tune into our incredible other shows across Private Property's social media pages. It's a Friday, so you can look forward to Chad bringing you the Home Shoppers Show, and that also comes to your screens every single Monday at 8 p.m. And every Tuesdays and Thursdays, Umbali Nwako brings you the Farming Podcast, tackling all things agriculture. So for all of you at home who've got green fingers, that is a show that you certainly do not want to miss out on. And on Wednesdays, Esther Clausen takes you through the first-time home buyer show, where she's always in conversation with people who've not only walked that first-time home buying journey, but have gone on to grow their property portfolios from strength to strength. Well, those are some of the great shows that you can tune into every single weekday right here on the Private Property Podcast, Private Property social media platforms, every weekday at 8 p.m. Now, as you know, I know that, of course, today was the Real Estate Industry Summit. I want to find out from you at home, were you attending the virtual event? And if you were, what were some of the most interesting sessions that you attended earlier on today? Do let us know down here below. I certainly want to find out from you at home which ones were some of the key sessions that you attended. Now, this evening, we're going to be looking at something that I'm very, very excited about. But before we get to it, you know that we are running our great competition where you stand a chance of walking away with 500 rands in cash every single weekday right here on the show. And all you have to do to stand a chance of walking away with that cash is to make sure that you comment on the pinned post on our social media page, that is on the Facebook page. And if we call your name, drop us a message down here below and you walk away with the cash prize. We've got 500 rands in the money bag, so I'm excited to see who the lucky winner is later on is going to be. I hope you're watching and, of course, ready to drop us that message and really end of payday weekend with an extra 500 rands in your bank account. I think that's certainly a great way to end off the week, or certainly end of the month. Well, this evening we're having a conversation with somebody that I know of far too well. I was even saying to him that I'm actually very familiar about, who he is, the work that he does, because this is one of the data sets that certainly as a property professional you look at school. This is one of the data sets that we look at. So when we talk about understanding data, making data-driven decisions, this is literally one of the resources that we tap into on a quarterly basis. We're looking at the state of the property market report, and I'm in conversation with Erwin Road, who is the CEO at Road and Associates. Erwin, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Good evening, Sam.
Now, I think, Erwin, when I look at the road report, I'm very familiar with the road report. But for purposes of the people at home who may not be as familiar with what it is, what it measures, perhaps take us through what is the road report and what exactly goes into what we then sort of read up on a quarterly basis when we go through the report.
Right. Thank you very much for the question. My firm is, the name of my firm is Road and Associates, RODE, no H, one O. And we have been in existence for 33 years. And we are best known, apart from being valuers, property valuers, we are also producers of the Roda report. Roda's report on the South African property market. It is a full title. And what this report really does is it gives you the state of the property market in South Africa. And how do we do it? We have a panel of experts in every city, every metropolitan city, and also in some smaller cities like Polokwane and Nelspruit, and well, East London is not small. We have a panel in East London, in Port Elizabeth. Sorry, I'm not using the new names at the moment still. Bloemfontein, even George, we have a panel nowadays, and Cape Town. And because the firm is 33 years old, the data that we collect in this way goes back 33 years plus, because I started doing these surveys even before I started my company. The way we do the survey is we ask our panel the same question every quarter. For instance, what, in your opinion, is the current market rental rate for Grade A office rentals in the CBD of Durban? That would be an example. Or for Grade B offices in Durban, or for Grade C in the CBD of Durban, and so forth and so on. We've got hundreds of nodes in the country that we track in this way, and also industrial townships that we track in this way. Then we do capitalization rates. Those of you who are not au fait with capitalization rate, is nothing but the income yield of the first year divided by the market value, or the price that you pay, assuming the property is fully let at market rentals. We track operating costs, we track house prices, we track flat rentals countrywide, and so forth and so on. So it's a very wide array of areas, physical areas, geographic areas, and property types and grades of properties types that we track. And as a consequence, I'm told it's become the Bible of the banks, for instance, when they receive, when they have to calculate market rentals or see whether market rentals are market related. Even the Department of Public Works apparently is using it as a standard against which they measure whether new leases that they sign is market related or not, and hopefully that eventually will put an end to the nonsense of the Department of Public Works. I'm talking about the national one now. I think that's already come to an end, where they were signing rentals at double the market rental rate. Yeah, so that's what's. I think that from a publicity side, this is what we're best known for. But we also have other publications. We've got the 6-year forecast publication, where we forecast the crucial variables, things like market rental rates, capitalization rates, for the various property types, including offices, industrial, and shopping centers, and so forth. Yeah, so it's a very wide-ranging survey that we do. So it's become a standard in the marketplace for serious investors.
I must say, I'm not a particularly big fan of consuming industrial property data just as a general, even handling industrial property, case studies. I often complain about it quite a lot on my social media platforms. But of course, this is data that we do need to track, especially if you're in the industrial property space. And I'm interested to find out from you, Erwin. I mean, the big thing that I was even saying to you before we came on air is a lot of the viewers at home, and even with the show, we focus quite a lot on residential property. A lot of the viewers are either property investors or certainly looking to go into property investment and really want to get a good sense of what the market is looking like at different points. I think before we even look at the latest data and what it's telling us, given that you've been in the industry and been doing this work for literally longer than I've been alive, I'm keen to hear from, quite literally, I'm keen to hear from you. What have been just some of the general trends that you've seen when it comes to residential property in particular, especially those who are looking at it from an investment perspective? And so we're looking at, landlords, and sometimes it can be sort of your more DIY landlords or your more institutional landlords. What have just been the general patterns and trends that you have picked up over the, 3 decades plus that you can share with us?
I think the first trend that comes to mind is that in South Africa, our flats and our houses are becoming smaller. That's a long-term trend. It's been a lot with us for quite a number of at least 1 or 2 decades. But as of late, I think it's accelerated. The trend is accelerated, and you'll see that some developers are developing and marketing or converting old office buildings and then creating flats of even as small as 20 square meters or up to 40 square meters, something like that, in order to make it more affordable for people to stay in the CBDs. Because this is the big slogan at the moment. The not so well off must be able to stay close to work in the CBD. Now, whether that is such an important thing is a different question, because what with modern technology like this Zoom session that we are having, you can sit in the South Pole and in the Antarctica, and as long as you've got a broadband, you can actually do your work. But of course, there are works. There's types of work and types of work. So it all depends on what exactly you are. If you are a clerical type of person, then of course distance work could or can or does work. But if you are a policeman or a nurse or something like that, and you've got to be on the spot at a certain time, and you've got to travel 20, 30 kilometers, it's expensive. So that is a rationale behind this trend of converting office buildings to residential, and then in the process quite often make it very small. Of course, from the developer's point of view, when you have very small units, residential units in a block of flats, say, your rental per square meter is higher for the smaller units than for the larger units. So that's how they make these developments, making them pay from a financial point of view. That is the most important trend, I think, of the past number of years. The other trend is more of a cyclical nature. In real terms, house prices peaked in South Africa, as in most of the developed world, in 28, 29, thereabouts. In South Africa, 29. And then we had the crash, big financial crash, and then prices started falling like a stone. And then halfway through the fall, it stopped and started moving sideways. And now it's once again, in real terms, these house prices are coming down. Now, what I mean by real terms is after having taken out building cost inflation, right? Mm-hmm. So we're looking at it from a developer's point of view. How attractive is it for the developer to develop, given what he can get in the form of rentals, or when he sells it, the sales rate per square meter of the units he's selling, compared with the building cost and also the cost of the land if he had. So I think those are the two most important trends, and from a cyclical point of view. Bear in mind that we had a boost in house prices recently, until a few months ago, because of the sharp drop in interest rates, to counter the virus effect. But this is not going to last forever. And this is a danger signal. If you are a marginal buyer and you can only just afford that monthly installment because of the very low interest rates, you run the risk that when interest rates start rising, and they will, that all of a sudden this house or unit of yours will become less affordable. So be careful for overreach. We are living in uncertain times. Nobody knows what's going to come next. I mean, just to give you another example, for all we know, next year we're going to have a fourth wave after COVID.
And I mean, not even next year. I think we heard that the Minister of Health was actually projecting that we'll say in the early stages of a fourth wave. And if things sort of continue the way that they're continuing, we could very easily be looking at a fourth wave during the festive season, similar to what we experienced, last year in the festive season, where they ended up having to tighten up restrictions even more because of how the numbers were escalating. So I certainly do agree with you that the marginal buyers, and they're the ones that I'm often most worried about, because oftentimes when you look at the first-time home buyer market, and certainly when we looked at it, as these interest rates have been going down in the past 18 months, a lot of the praise has been that we're seeing more people being able to access the first-time home buyer market. And for me, it's also alarming that so many people are able to access it, which is great for them and their ability to access it. But the reality is these interest rates are going to go up. And I often wonder whether they've budgeted for the increase and whether they'll still be able to afford it given the increase. And I think that's probably such a big area of concern, even as much as banks are saying, they relatively strict on the affordability, but we know that they're also trying to have business and will look at the numbers and probably be able to say, yeah, we are making a call that they'll be able to afford this, even though if you were to set it up as or look at it from the interest rate that we had last year, January, it would actually put quite a bit of pressure in the household overall budget.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about our banks. I must say, as a generalization, I must hand bouquet to our banks. They are, as opposed to some other banks in some other countries, are very responsible people. That's why our crash in 2009 wasn't as bad as say in the US or UK, because our banks are very conservative when it comes to loan funds. But having said that, for the so-called affordable market, that is for housing up to, say, 700,000 rands, thereabouts, between, say, 500 and 700 and 800,000 thereabouts. That's a so-called affordable market, depending on your definition. They are actually handing out 100% bonds, which is very, very dangerous. But on the positive side, we must take off our hat to our banks. I understand their policies as a generalization. Their policies are to assume that even today, that when they accept the passing of a mortgage bond on a house, they assume that interest rates will be 2 percentage points higher than at present. What they found. Yeah. No, which is, I think that's a very responsible way of dealing with this.
I am this evening in conversation with Erwin Road, who is the CEO at Road and Associates. We're looking at the state of the property market report. And of course, we are going to be finding out shortly who the lucky winner is of the 500 rands in cash. I want to find out from you at home, and especially for the property investors, as I was saying earlier, that one of the big things is that we are, using different kinds of data, using different kinds of sources of information to be able to make better decisions about our property portfolios and even the different property businesses that we have. Earlier on today, we had the Real Estate Industry Summit that took place. I want to find out from you at home, were you in attendance? If you were, which were some of the key sessions that you enjoyed and what were some takeaways for you at home? But in the meantime, let's take a quick look at who the lucky winner is this evening. And that lucky winner is Umenzi Buthelezi. I do hope that means it is indeed watching us live right here on the show. Means Butelezi, I know that I see you quite often in the comment section watching the show. So do drop us a message down here below. 500 rands is up for grabs. It's a payday weekend, so it's certainly a great way for you to have a little bit of extra cash in your pocket. And as we continue our conversation about the state of the property market report in South Africa with Erwin Road, I want to find out from you, Erwin. I think when we look at the investor, the investor market, as we were saying earlier, and I'm keen to hear from you. What have been some of the behaviors that we've seen when it comes to the investor market? And it doesn't have to be just sort of in this quarter, because again, I quite appreciate the benefit of you having sort of tracked it for quite an extended period of time and seeing the different patterns along the years. What have been some of the behaviors, especially from more, I want to say, the more individual or small scale investors, as opposed to more of the institutional, bigger investors? Because I think they're also playing in a very different game completely, whereas your let's call them DIY investor or DIY landlords almost play a relatively different game. What have been some of the general behaviors and trends that you've picked up with how those kinds of investors have sort of played it out, and those who've perhaps stopped investing in property and maybe decided to even offload some of their assets for whatever reason over the past couple of years? If you could just share some insight on some of the behaviors and trends that you've seen with that particular market.
Yeah, what with the dropping of interest rates last year, of course, what we saw is two things. First of all, we saw that house prices rallied a little bit. It was a mini boom that we had. And of course, at the same time, the number of sales also went up. So your estate agents were very happy. They were doing really well at that stage. Now it seems that it is worn off, and those who wanted to or can or could afford have done that to buy their home. And we see a drop off in the number of sales, and we're seeing house prices decelerating sharply again, as you would expect, given the fundamentals. And by fundamentals, I mean given the economy. The economy is in dire straits. We know the fiscus is in a corner. We know about Eskom, and we know about the SOEs, and as a result of which, the big question that you can ask from an economic point of view, and please, the property market is driven by the economy. It's as simple as that. The big question at the moment is, by when? Will it be 2022 or 2023 or 2024? Will the real GDP, be to the same level as what it was in 2019 before the pandemic started? That is the big question, and of course, like all futures, it's unknown and uncertain. So you have two camps at the moment. You have amateur investors, if I may call them that, who think, well, prices are so low now in real terms, now is a buying opportunity. And I'm sure there are some of them buying at the moment. And then there are the others, and I'm one of them. Not that I'm an active investor, but from my research, I think the worst is to come. I think values and rentals will start going further down over the next few years. Another 2 years or so at least, depending, of course, on what's going to happen to the economy in general. That is the key. That is the key. If you knew what's going to happen to the economy and whether we will be forced to ask the IMF to give us a loan, and these loans are always They always
always
have
come with
strings
all
attached.
kinds of strings attached, right?
Exactly,
You can never have no
exactly.
strings attached loan, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think we're actually doing the exact thing in applied macroeconomics, where you look at the effects of having some of these international organizations loaning money, especially to the global south and various developing nations, and the after effect that that's had, not just to the economy at large, but to the real estate sector in general. And we look at different examples. You look at a Zim, you look at even a Mozambique, and a few others, within sort of SADC, and kind of weighed up with where South Africa could potentially be given different kinds of scenarios. And I think that's an important thing to always be on top of, because as you've pointed out, I think with futures, you never quite know where it's going to be going. And that's why it becomes so important to be able to track different data sets and try to make sense of it as much as possible. I see we're already getting some love on our social media pages. Manzo Victoria, Queen Tago, Kateko Ahabe saying happy long weekend, Bafetu. It's not quite a long weekend. We are voting on Monday. I do hope that Abantu, you don't have zipit days. Go and vote on Monday. So let's not quite treat it like the normal long weekend, because our normal long weekend, you can go out of town. This isn't a going out of town long weekend. You must stay in town, so you vote in your, of course, local area. That's quite an important one, quite a bit. We've got a question here from Gloria Whitfield saying, just joined Gloria from Port Elizabeth. Which region is ahead with sales? The particular province in South Africa. And I think broadly, because I know you probably don't have that data right in front of you, Erwin, when you look at just the general sales trends and sales data, I know that Western Cape, tends to perform relatively well in terms of the amount, as opposed to necessarily the number of units being sold. But what have been just interesting sales data around the country, even in the past 3 decades, when you observe it?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one. I still remember when I was a young man working for Old Mutual. And we're now talking about the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. When you transferred somebody from Cape Town to Johannesburg, you had to increase that staff member's housing allowance, because houses were much higher in Joburg than in Cape Town. And
now it's the other way around.
Now it's the other way around.
Yeah.
I can actually put a date to it when it started changing, and that is more or less the middle 80s when things started. That was after, you may recall, those of you old enough, that we had this wonderful gold boom that ended in 1980. And that drove the economy for another few years, and it was a wonderful time. And with it, property prices shot through the roof, and and then thereafter, of course, the gold price and other commodity prices, like say copper or iron ore, whatever, started decelerating in real terms. And that's very important for South Africa, because South Africa is primarily an exporter of commodities. And commodities includes, by the way, soft commodities like mealies, maize, corn, whatever the Americans call it. So in other words, it also includes foodstuffs. So from that time, more or less, this is my personal guesstimate, that from that time, the Joburg economy did less well than the Western Cape's economy, because the Western Cape's economy is more diversified and less dependent on a booming commodity market. And I could clearly see it in the Cape Town CBD and surrounds. We now call it the Cape Town Bowl, the City Bowl. That's the term we nowadays use. That is, and also around at the Atlantic seaboard thereabouts. Our prices had increased incredibly from the mid 80s onwards, and this trend just continued and throughout. And since 1994, it seems that the trend had accelerated, in fact, because then there came a political aspect to it as well. The perception is now that the Western Cape and Cape Town itself is better managed than the rest of the country. So the Western Cape, including the South Cape, and Cape Town and the environs, has become a popular place to retire. And what with modern communications, one guess, I haven't got data on it, but I guess that many a person has convinced his or her boss that it's actually better for him or her to work from Cape Town rather from Joburg and do a Zoom every day with his or her boss. So in a nutshell, yes, the Western Cape and Cape Town especially, our house prices here have become very expensive relative to the rest of the country. That's a fact. The problem is, however, that there's a limit to a thing like this. You can't have a constant growth rate of, say, 6% per annum for house prices in the Western Cape and only 3% in the rest of the country, because sooner or later, houses become unaffordable at those growth rates. And then this wonderful market that we call the free market rebalances itself, you know.
Going to go down. I think Cape Town, Cape Town, prices are at a level where I think even analysts are saying, look, it's unsustainably high. And the reality is you keep pushing it higher and higher, or it keeps sort of going higher. At some point, there are only so many people, certainly from a local perspective now. Let's almost for a second not consider, the overseas market. There are only so many people who can sustainably be able to afford those price points, and then what's going to happen? And even those who currently have them now, we know that quite a significant percentage of them is dual income households, and it's also incomes that are already under pressure. So it's not this automatic, they have quite a lot of money or access, capital lying around, because we're also very aware of what income levels and income price points in South Africa are at. And so it really is unsustainable, and it's unfortunate that they've continued to escalate at the rate that they've escalated, and many of us, are like waiting for it to price correct, and it's more often than not it's a matter of time about when is that going to happen for the local market, because we know that if you look at markets in other part of the world, that price point still works very well for them. So I think it is one of those things where we cannot pat ourselves in the back when a Cape Town is unsustainably that much higher than other parts of the country in ways where one could argue you can't quite justify it, and others would be like, no, it's justifiable for different sets of reasons. But I think when we kind of take a step back in a relatively realistic sense, and you were saying this earlier, that one of the things with residential properties is that they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Even in Cape Town, a lot of these developments are smaller and smaller and smaller. We're seeing micro apartments that are costing a ridiculous amount per square meter in ways where we are also just saying this is not sustainable, right? And I think it's going to be interesting to observe what's going to be happening in the next couple of years, particularly to that market. And Erwin, as we wrap up, I actually want to find out from you what your projections are for the residential property market, say, in the next 3 to 5 years. One of the things that you already pointed out is we know that interest rates are going to go up. And that's just one of the things where if there were marginal buyers who kind of just got in, they're very likely going to be in a very dangerous, position unless their income kind of, goes up, or they're able to cut out in their budget other things for them to be able to afford still servicing that home loan facility, afford the escalating rent, rates, and of course the levies, because I think that's also the other reality where it isn't dependent on interest rates. Rates keep going up, or certainly, and it's going up in ways that has put a lot of pressure on us as homeowners. Levies are also, doing the same way. I'm keen to hear from you. What are some of your projections for the residential property sector in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, as I said before, it's driven by the economy. So give me your estimate of what the economy will do over the next 2 to 3 years, and I can tell you what will happen to the market, to the property market. But let's be practical now. My view, for what it's worth, is that the economy is facing a period of stagnation for many years to come, because we've got to rectify the ship that was near capsizing, and that's going to take time. It's not going to you're not going to do that overnight. It's going to be long, hard work, and in the process, we're going to have many demonstrations in the streets, etc., etc. I mean, for one thing, the government will be forced to put a damper on any salary increases in the public sector, and we know that the public sector is overblown. There are too many public sector employees. We know that compared to other countries. So it's quite possible, and the government should actually reduce its salary bill. And one of the ways of doing that is to reduce the number of employees, civil servants. So what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is that not only jobs are on the line, but those who retain their jobs, their salary increases in real terms will go backwards. In other words, with inflation of, say, 5%, and you get a 0% increase in your salary or wages, I mean, obviously, you're going to have more and more trouble to make ends meet as a consumer. So I appeal to everybody who's listening, please, guys, live within your means. Don't use debt to buy food. You simply have to cut your expenditure to stay within your budget. Don't make debt, because we could be facing tough times ahead of us. And the implication of that is that property-wise, prices of houses, and well, we're talking of houses now. Prices of houses will, in real terms, in other words, after deducting inflation, will keep on declining, especially, of course, when interest rates start rising. And who knows how high interest rates will go. We know that the rest of the world has had ridiculous 0% interest rates over the past decade and longer. And this is, of course, not sustainable. Sooner or later, and we already see it in many countries around the world, interest rates have already started rising. So, yeah, tough times are lying ahead, and I'm sorry, I'm just a messenger. Please don't decapitate me.
You know, Erwin, when you're saying tough times are lying ahead, you're actually reminding me of, and I know you wouldn't know this reference, there's a social media video that goes around that says that tough times never last, only tough people do. And unfortunately, you know, from you, we're getting a sense that tough times are going to last, and we need to buckle up and best prepare ourselves for it. Erwin, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Pleasure.
And that is Erwin Road, who is the CEO at Road and Associates, wrapping up the Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zamantungwa Kumalo. Umenzi Buthelezi unfortunately didn't drop us a message down here below. The team has let me know. I think this is probably the one time he decided not to watch the show, and he gets to be a winner. So I'm actually just like, I'm hacked on his behalf, because I know that he's usually, you know, tuned in every single evening and dropping us a message. But that is where we're going to leave it this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. From myself, Zamantungwa Kumalo, I'll be back on your screens on Tuesday evening. I do hope that you don't treat this as a long weekend. Go out there and vote on Monday, and you and I are going to be back on Tuesday at the same time. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.